So just a quick reminder that not only is today Easter Sunday, it's also the third Sunday of the month. And on the third Sunday of the month, there's an extended homily, question-answer discussion open up to all of us. And the reading is from John's Gospel. And because we've heard it a million times, I want you just to imagine that you're living around 30 AD and that you've been part of this new movement called the Jesus movement. And terrible things have happened in the last few days. And suddenly a report is coming through of something even more extraordinary. So imagine you're hearing this account for the very first time. What kind of an effect would it have on you? Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." So Peter and the other disciple started for the tomb. Both were running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent over and looked in at the strips of linen lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter came along behind him and went straight into the tomb. He saw the strips of linen lying there, as well as the cloth that had been wrapped around Jesus' head. This cloth was still lying in its place, separate from the linen. Finally, the other disciple who had reached the tomb first also went inside. He saw and he believed. They still did not understand from the scriptures that Jesus had to rise from the dead. Then the disciples went back to where they were staying. But Mary stood outside, weeping. As she wept, she bent down to look once more into the tomb and saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" "They've taken my Lord away," she said, "and I don't know where they've put him." At this, she turned round and saw Jesus standing there, but she didn't realize that it was he. He asked her, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it that you're looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you've taken away the body, tell me where you've put him, and I will come and get him." Jesus said, "Miriamu." She turned towards him and cried out in Aramaic, "Rabboni?" which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not cling to me, Mary, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and sisters and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and to your Father, to my God and to your God." Mary Magdalene ran to the disciples with the news, "I've seen the Lord." A gospel inspired by God. After 8 years in the seminary, on the 4th of June in 1972, 11 of my classmates and myself were ordained in a little chapel in County Wicklow in Ireland, a little place called Killamote. And we were given 3 or 4 weeks vacation afterwards, and then we were being sent to various parts of Africa and South America as missionaries. But firstly, the whole group was packed off to Oxford University to spend 7 weeks at the Summer Institute of Linguistics, where we were going to be taught how to deal with new languages, particularly if the languages were not written down. How you listen to sounds, how you phonetically represent the sounds you're hearing, how you create a grammar for yourself and a vocabulary for yourself, and figure out how to use and listen to the language. And so at that stage, I'd been deputed to go to Nigeria. I'd applied for a visa to go to Nigeria a year before, but it still hadn't come through because the Biafran War was just coming to a close. And so I thought I was going to be learning a language called Igbo, which is a language spoken in the eastern part of Nigeria. And so I spent 7 weeks in Oxford learning how to listen and record this language. And one of the things they taught us how to do was, in those days, tape recorders were these big, big machines with the 2 big spools, remember the spools? And there's a tape running between them. Yeah, those were the kinds of things we had. And they taught us how to make what they called tape loops. So when you go to an area and you're trying to learn a language, the first thing you do is you get an informant. You find a native speaker of the language who will agree to teach you the language. And the idea was, the trick was listen, mimic, listen. That was the trick in learning that. Listen, mimic, listen. But they taught us how to make tape loops. So you record a phrase that the informant spoke. And then you chop off that piece of tape, and you put it together, and you put a little bit of sellotape in it, and you create a loop. And then you put it between the two spools, and if it's too long, you have to get a third spool, and a piece, just a spool of thread, and stick it on a pencil someplace else, and so the loop would go from the spool to this one, and you'd run it through the head, and it would just keep repeating the phrase that you were trying to learn. And if it were a particularly long phrase as you got better and better, the loops would get bigger and bigger. And you'd have a pencil somewhere across the room, and the tape recorder is over there, and this loop is going around repeating this phrase. And occasionally you'd build a period of silence into it, so that between each iteration there was time to begin processing what you were hearing. So you could build this silence into this kind of tape loops. Now, for some strange reason, that's what came to me this morning. That was the image that came to me this morning when I was meditating and thinking about what was I going to say about resurrection today? How would I explain resurrection? And this notion of the tape loop came up. Because I need to distinguish between apparitions and ghosts before we can talk meaningfully about resurrection. And there's a subtle distinction between them. So in some senses, a ghost is like a tape loop. But imagine that instead of just an ordinary tape loop, it's a video tape loop. So imagine you could do in a video format what we did in the audio format. You create this big loop, and the same scene just keeps repeating again and again and again. And you can build some period of silence into it. And the silence can be 24 hours long, or it can be a year long. So between each appearance of this ghost figure, there may be a year's time, but this loop keeps repeating itself. And so in some senses, that's what a ghost is like. A ghost is like trapped energy, a trapped videotape that keeps repeating in a particular location. And if you're there at the right time, or the wrong time, whichever way you choose to look at it, you're either going to see it or you're not going to see it. But it is not interactive. You can't interact with the ghost. A ghost is just doing the shtick, and it's going round and round and round and round. And what's happening is that the person who has died, instead of continuing to travel towards the light, now begins to identify with the next level of body up, what we call the etheric body. It's an energy template. And the person is identified with that. And this one just keeps going round and round and round and round and round. Now, an apparition is different. An apparition is interactive, because it happens when a person gets stuck, not at the etheric level, but at the astral level. And when you get stuck at the astral level, you become some kind of a discombobulated entity, and you may loop around, but now you're interactive. You can interact actually with people. So it's a very, very different phenomenon. So I just want to get that straight in my head before I start trying to explain what I mean by resurrection. And I'm going to make 4 main points this morning. I'm going to talk firstly about body. We have to understand body before we can understand resurrection. And secondly, I'm going to talk about what to appear means, the verb that's used in Greek. What does it mean when it says he appeared? I'm going to look at that verb. And thirdly, I want to look at the notion of truth and transformation. And then at that stage, we're ready to begin thinking about resurrection. So there'll be 3 preliminary points before I talk about what resurrection really means. So in order to understand resurrection, in order to understand Eucharist, in order to understand death, in order to understand heaven, in order to understand ghosts, and in order to understand apparition, you have to know what you mean by body. And we've got very, very different notions of body. And our notion of body, particularly in the West, is a totally impoverished notion of body. Other cosmologies and other great cultures and other great civilizations have had much, much more sophisticated understandings of what body means. So in the West, we think that the body is just this WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. This physical apparatus, this physical spacesuit, with tendons and ligaments and bones and a cardiovascular system and a respiratory system. We think that's what the body is. And it's not. That's only one articulation. That's one manifestation of body. It's a very impoverished model if we think that's all that we are. Other cultures have had much more sophisticated notions. So, for instance, the Egyptians had 2 words for body, the ka and ba. Ba was the physical spacesuit, and ka was the internal energy template from which the physical was constructed. So it's a two-tier model of body. The Persians, Zoroastrianism, also had a two-tier level, and so the etheric level was called Fravashi. So there was the physical body, and then there was Fravashi, which was the kind of the energy template behind it. The Greeks went one better, and the Greeks had 3 different words for body. And when you're reading the New Testament is written in Greek, you cannot understand what Paul is talking about when he talks about resurrection, and you cannot understand what Paul is talking about when he speaks of Eucharist, unless you understand the distinction between these 3 words. And the 3 words in Greek are sarx, soma, and pneuma. Sarx means this stuff, flesh and blood. Soma means the etheric body, and pneuma means the spirit body. And we get the English word pneumatic, as in air, tires, from this same word. So pneuma in Greek can mean breath or life or spirit. So there's 3 levels of body, and when Paul is talking about Eucharist and resurrection, he says very definitely, sarx, in other words, flesh and blood, cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. So we're talking about resurrection, we're not talking about flesh and blood resurrection. When he's talking about Eucharist, he's not talking about chewing down on Jesus' big toe. So he's saying sarx. We're not talking about sarx when we talk about Eucharist. We're not talking about sarx when we talk about resurrection. We're talking about either soma or pneuma. So the Greeks had it much better. But the people who did it best were the Hindus. And the Hindus have a 7-level model of body. And I've spoken about it many times before. I want to extend myself on it this morning because it is key to understanding resurrection and Eucharist as well. And so in the Hindu model of body, the belief system was that we have 7 totally different levels of body. Now, personally, I think there are a lot more than that. It's the same way that we think that the rainbow has 7 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. But in actual fact, there's an infinite number of colors and gradations in between. We slot them into these 7 pigeonholes. And so there are actually many, many more levels to body even than the Hindus say. But it's a better model than what we're used to. So I'll stick with that one for a few minutes. So firstly, there's this physical body that we can all see and interact with. And it's vibrating between infrared and ultraviolet, between 400 nanometers and 700 nanometers, so we can see it and hear it and taste it and touch it and smell it. And so that's the physical body, what they call the gross body, the basic body. And it's built up, obviously, of molecular structure. It's built up of basically carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. But we're constantly recycling it. Every time you take a breath in and breathe out, you're literally letting go of millions of molecules of your own matter. It's as if your physical body were a brick house consisting of, let's say, you had 1 million bricks. And every second you take a brick out of the wall and you throw it away and you replace it with a lookalike brick. And so at the end of 7 years, you've got a brand new house. There's not a single brick left in the house that was there originally. But it looks the same because you've inserted the pieces according to the pre-existing etheric template, some kind of a blueprint. And so even the physical body you have, if you look at a photograph of yourself taken 7 years ago, there is literally not a single cell in your body today that was in it 7 years ago. So you're constantly resurrecting. You're constantly reincarnating. So even at the physical level, resurrection and reincarnation are happening with every breath cycle. You're breathing in and out approximately 18 times every minute, when you're busy, maybe 5 or 6 times when you're relaxed. So you're reinventing yourself, you're resurrecting yourself, you're reincarnating yourself on a regular basis. And so even the body you think is stable is anything but stable. Now, when it comes to dying, we shed this mortal coil, and it gets recycled back into the ecosystem. Other creatures borrow from it. And so we're borrowing during life, and we're borrowing after life. So in the course of the hour and a half or 2 hours we spent with each other today, we'll exchange molecules of matter with each other. You're not going to walk out the door at the end of this Mass with the same body that you came in with. There's a limited number of molecules of matter on planet Earth. So statistically speaking, there's somebody sitting in this church this morning that has, molecules that once belonged to Genghis Khan, or Jesus Christ, or Mahatma Gandhi. There's a limited supply. It's a huge number, but it's a limited supply. So we're continuing to exchange these with each other. So as we leave the church today, we've literally interchanged our physical bodies with each other. So what does the physical body then mean? When we die then, we fully share it back to the ecosystem. And a whole bunch of stuff begins to borrow from it. Little squirrels are borrowing it from it, and birds that fly by are borrowing it from it, and the worms are borrowing from it. Everybody is like, welcome to the feast. Take what you need, I don't need it anymore. So that's what happens at the death of the physical body. There's a second level of body, however, which is vibrating at a higher frequency, so high that most of us can't see it. People who have the ability to see auras, that's what they're watching. When you see somebody's auras, it's like an energy template, and it's vibrating at a higher frequency than the physical body. Now, it's composed of pure energy, and it is the blueprint of which the physical body is constructed. If you want to build a house, there are three things you need to do. You need to have a blueprint, you need to have materials, and you need a labor force. You bring these three together, and then you get a three-dimensional real house. You take the blueprint, you buy your materials, and then you bring in a few people to put the materials together according to the blueprint, and bingo, you get a house that you can actually live inside in a three-dimensional reality. That's what the etheric body is. The etheric body is the blueprint that helps us create the physical body. Now, unfortunately, when the physical body dies, there are some beings who now get trapped in the etheric body. They think they are their etheric body. Since they can no longer kind of, dock with the physical body, they're trying desperately to hold on to the next best thing. And that's what happens when you get ghostly appearances. They're identified with the etheric level. Now, the etheric level is meant to dissolve after 3 or 4 days. Once the physical body has died, the etheric body is meant to dissolve and be recycled back into the universe as free energy, for other uses. But some will cling onto this, and that's when you get ghosts. A third level of body is the astral body, and this is vibrating at a still higher plane, and you have access to this regularly. This is the level of yourself from which you download your emotional responses to life. And it is the level of yourself that you use when you're dreaming at night. You're literally traveling in this astral body of yours. And so you can be in Africa, you can be in Ireland, time doesn't matter in your astral body, and space doesn't matter. Causation is very, very different. Solid matter doesn't exist there. You're generating this level of body, at an astral level. And according to Hinduism, when the physical body dies and gets recycled and the etheric body gets released, the astral body becomes the archives of all of the experiences of the life just ended. So it becomes the archives of all of your experiences of this life. Now, if somebody gets identified with the astral body, so the physical body has died, you've managed to let go of the physical body, you've managed to let go even of the etheric body, but you can get, identified with the astral body. And that's when we get apparitions. People, interactive ghosts, that hang around places and they can actually interact with people. They're still identified with a lesser notion of the self. And they hang out in what Hinduism will call the lower astral realms. And when you're dreaming at night and traveling at night, or if you're having an out-of-body experience, or if you're having a near-death experience, that is the level of yourself that you're inhabiting. And you have to be really careful. If you choose to travel in that realm by learning how to have out-of-body experiences or to dream lucidly, you have to be very, very careful that as you move through these astral realms, you don't, run foul of discombobulated entities. So you go with protection around you. So that's the third level of body. There's a fourth level of body that they call the mental body, and it's the place of ratiocination. It is what Plato would call the ideal realm, the place from which we download all our great ideas, all our great insights. So it's a level of the body that's vibrating higher at a higher level still. There's a fifth level that Hinduism will call the causal body. And it's the place where we recognize our psychic abilities. So we're clairvoyant, clairaudient, clairsentient. We have telepathy. We've got precognition. We've got psychokinesis. So all these are part of what it means to be a human being on the way into incarnation. Now, most of us don't activate these things, but they're there for all of us. But Hinduism also teaches that this is the master archives of all of the experiences of all of the incarnations you've ever lived, either on this planet or elsewhere, that they're all archived in that place. And so when you begin to come back in, for a new incarnation, you pick up all the data points, you pick up all the learning that you've generated in previous incarnations, and you come in, and the temperament with which you're born as a little baby already has hardwired into it all of those experiences. Now, in my experience, or my theory is that people who incarnate very, very quickly, somebody who's died very traumatically and incarnates very, very quickly, and there were a lot of such people at the end of World War II, they haven't gone up, so they've incarnated from the astral plane without ever going back further, and so basically they're operating with just information from the previous life just ended. So it's a very impoverished archive that they're operating out of, which is why they become such difficult characters to be around. They haven't gone through the entire process of picking up all of the wisdom they've generated in all of their lifetimes, because they've just recycled from the astral level back into the physical plane really, really quickly. But if you do go back to the causal level, on your way back down on the next incarnation, you pick up all of the wisdom, all of the experiences, all of the growing that you've done in all of the previous incarnations you've lived. And you're born at this stage now, your temperament as a little infant already has imprinted on it all of the wisdom of all those incarnations you've had. The sixth level of body, they will call Atman, or soul. And that's the level at which we recognize that we're just bite-sized pieces of God. That separation is an illusion, because the final stage is Brahman, or cosmic consciousness. The realization that every shaft of sunlight is merely an articulation of the sun. So it's not separate from the sun, it's merely an articulation or a manifestation of sun. So instead of identifying with the articulation of the sun, we realize we are the sun. There is nothing except the sun. There is nothing except God. Every single one of us is God in drag. Every single one of us is God having a human experience. And so that's the seventh level of heaven. So unless we understand this model of body, it is very difficult to understand what resurrection is about. Because we think resurrection then is just merely the molecular reconstruction of who I was 2 minutes before I died. And that is not what it is about. It's about realizing that it's a different level of body that's coming back out. So park that piece. That's the first piece I want to say. Second thing I want to address then is the verb which is translated into English from the Greek as to appear. Jesus appeared to. We think appear, when we use it in English, is that an appearance means that if Jesus were to manifest and stand right here next to his mother, and David is back there with the video camera, and David has pointed the video camera will pick Jesus up. We think that's what appear means. That is not what appear means. It's more like, a pop star makes an appearance at a rock concert. What does that mean? It means he chooses to be present for a performance. That's the sense. So the sense of the Greek verb is that Jesus chooses to make himself visible to. But he chooses to make himself visible to only people who know how to shift the state of consciousness that allows them to pick up on that reality. It's not that if Jesus appeared and he's right there and we're all looking at him, that everybody's going to see him and say, oh, there he is. It may well be that there'll be some people will see and some people won't, because it involves making a shift in consciousness. So it's not a video-tapeable event. And I want to use a very interesting story I came across some years ago of a group of American tourists who'd gone to India, and they were doing a tour of India. And one day on a street, they come across a fakir. And this fakir is sitting there cross-legged, and he's got a little basket there, and there's a little boy sitting by the basket, and there's a coiled rope inside in the basket. And the fakir begins to play his flute, and all of a sudden, the coiled rope begins to spiral upwards, spiraling upwards higher and higher and higher. And all of a sudden, the little boy gets up and starts climbing up the rope and disappears into the ether. And the crowd are totally shocked, amazed. They've never seen anything like this. They are totally amazed. So they come back to the States and they're talking about this extraordinary occurrence. So they decide to go back with a bigger group, and they're going to bring a camcorder with them the next visit. So 2 years later, they organize this trip, and they come back, and they see the same fakir, say in the same corner, and he's sitting there, cross-legged, and there's a little basket with the coiled rope, and there's little boys beside it, and there's the rope inside it, and he starts playing the flute, and they have the camcorder going, and they're watching it, and all of a sudden the rope comes out, and it spirals upwards, higher and higher and higher, and the little boy gets up, and he climbs on top of it, and goes right up, and disappears into the ether. And they're delighted, you can't believe it. And now they've got photographic proof of it. So they rush back to their hotel room, and they plug it into the television set, and they sit in front of it, and they watch what the camcorder has recorded. And according to the camcorder, nothing happened. The rope did not come out of the basket. The little boy did not climb up the rope. Nothing happened. And I think this guy is a total fake. They're really, really disgusted. Now here's the question. Did it really happen, or did it not happen? Was it an event that couldn't be captured by a camcorder because a camcorder does not have the ability to change its state of consciousness? So was this just merely a mass hypnosis, that this guy was some kind of a hypnotist and he pretended to them it was happening and he convinced them it was happening, and so there's like this mass hypnosis or there's mass illusion that they thought they saw the rope come up and spiral and the little boy climb up it? Or did it actually happen? But it happened in a different dimension. And what this fakir was doing was, he was bringing these guys into a different way of seeing. He was actually bringing them into a reality through a different state of consciousness in which, in fact, this event was actually taking place. But a camcorder does not have the ability to shift its state of consciousness. It's stuck just with physical reality. So the camcorder said, no, nothing happened, whereas their eyes told them something did happen. So who are you going to believe, your camcorder or your friend who had the visit? Now, in some senses, that's what the verb to appear, that's what it means in some senses. It is, once you have learned how to shift your state of consciousness, then you're in touch with other levels of reality. And they're as real or even more real than the physical one. But unless you're able to shift your state of consciousness, you don't have access to those. But when you do have access to them, miracles appear to happen. Do I believe in miracles? If by miracle you mean that God temporarily sets aside the laws of the universe in order to indulge the prayers of holy people, I don't believe in miracles. If, however, by miracle you mean that the universe is much, much more complex than we've understood, and that if we really, really grokked how the universe really, really works, then miracles do happen. Things which we can't explain according to our physical physics really happen when you shift your state of consciousness. So this is part of the understanding that for the disciples, they somehow learned to shift their state of consciousness and were having real encounters with the risen Christ. Which brings me to my third point. Of what then does transformation consist? I said to you many, many times that my definition of truth is that truth is not the same thing as fact. Something can be factual, but not true. And something can be true, but not factual. Facts are just information or data points about the physical universe. Truth is much different. My definition of truth is that something is true if it transforms me and aligns me with God. And something is ultimate truth if it transforms me radically and aligns me permanently with God. So whatever it is that transforms me or transforms me radically is true, whether or not it's factual. It is true. So you look at the events that these disciples witnessed over the 40 or 50 days after the physical death of Jesus Christ, and you look at the transformative effect of whatever they encountered had upon them. These were men who were greedy individuals planning how important each one was going to be in the kingdom of heaven when Jesus became the Messiah and became the religious and the political leader of Israel. One guy was going to be the minister for defense. The other guy was going to be the minister for education. The other guy was going to be the minister for agriculture. They had all assigned themselves their roles. That's who they were. And when it came down to when he's arrested, they all fled and abandoned him. Peter denied 3 times, I don't even know who the guy is. I know what you're talking about. All of a sudden, these are guys who are preaching eloquently and willing to die for the message. In fact, all of them would, except John, of the original 12. All of them would be killed for what they were saying, except John. What happened that allowed these ignorant, selfish, narcissistic fishermen to become these eloquent, courageous teachers up to their deaths? What happened? Obviously, something really transformative occurred. The really transformative occurrence was that they encountered the risen Christ. And they did it primarily through their Eucharistic celebrations. And this is the great power of Eucharist, properly understood. That Eucharist is not just a memorial of something that happened 2,000 years ago to a carpenter from Galilee. I've said to you many, many times that when you know how to use your mystical imagination, there is nothing preventing you from time traveling. There is no reason why you can't go backwards or forwards in time and take part in any event of your choice and spin off a parallel universe in which you are a player in that drama. You can go right back to the crucifixion, you can go right back to the resurrection, you can go back to the Last Supper, you can go to any part in human history if you know how to do it. And you can literally spin off a parallel universe in which you are a participant in that event. It'll be a slightly different story than the one you're reading in the Bible, but equally true. So that is what transformation means. Something radical happened to these men and these women that totally changed who they were and how they spent the rest of their lives. How do you explain that? You can only explain it because they encountered truth, as I'm defining it. Truth is that which transforms and aligns you with Source. And they spend the rest of their lives totally aligned with that realization. That is radically, radically transformative. And therefore, it is true by my definition. Which then brings me to the consideration of what then do I mean by resurrection. One of the most extraordinary artifacts on planet Earth is a 14-foot piece of linen. It's about 14 feet long, about 3.5 feet wide, and it's held in a city in Italy called Turin. It's called the Shroud of Turin. And it's been examined on several occasions, the latest being 1988. A group of scientists examined it. And the given wisdom with modern technology is that this fabric actually goes back 2,000 years. And it was the wrapping, the burial shroud of a man who was crucified. That's very, very obvious. But the thing I only learned very, very recently was that there are two different kinds of images on that cloth. There are blood images and there's radiation images. So they're very, very, very different. I heard a talk just a few days ago, a podcast by an English doctor, a guy called Andrew Silverman, whose specialty is physiology. And in examining this cloth, he comes to the conclusions that this was definitely a burial shroud for a person who was crucified. The hands are like this, the nail mark are through the wrists. There's no evidence of a thumb, because when you nail somebody through the wrist, the thumb contracts immediately. So there's no thumb image in it, because the thumb is contracted from being nailed through here. There are blood spatters, consistent with some kind of a cap of thorns being on this person's head. The wrists are marked, the feet are marked, and the entire front and the back of the body are filled with these long stripes where obviously somebody had been flagellated mercilessly, and the long stripes. So there are actually smudges of blood on this cloth, but that's not the most important image. But they've actually analyzed the blood, and it is AB. The blood type is AB, whatever that tells us about who the person was. But there's actually blood smudges. But it's not the blood that creates the image on the cloth. There's another image which has literally been done through some kind of radiation. And whereas the blood, kind of soaked into the cloth, the radiated image is less than 1/5,000th of a millimeter thick. Less than 1/5,000th of a millimeter thick. And it can only be explained by some kind of intense burst of radiation at some moment. But when he examines the physiology, when this happened, the body was not lying down. If the body were lying down, then the marks at the back would show that the tissue is depressed a little bit. Even though rigor mortis has set in, rigor mortis only affects the musculature, not the soft tissue. And so you can press upon a dead body and it'll give a little bit, as long as you don't get into the muscles. So it's obvious from the marks that this body was not lying down at the moment of this sudden release. It was upright, but it was levitating because the feet are pointed down like this. If it had been standing on the ground, the feet would be parallel to the ground. They're not. The feet are pointed down. And the hair is hanging down. If we're lying down, the hair will be going backwards. So the image is showing a person who's upright but levitating at this moment of this release of this extraordinary force, whatever it was. Now, it's not that complicated really when you think about it, because the human body is built of light. We're literally stardust. Literally, the elements of which our planet is composed were the results of supernovae that happened 9 billion years ago, where star systems just burst and scattered their molecular and atomic structure out into the universe. And then these constellated into new galaxies, new star systems, and new planets. So literally, this physical stuff of where we're constructed originally came from stars and from starlight. So a human body consists of about 50 trillion cells, roughly 10 to the power 14 cells. Every cell has roughly 10 to the power of 14 atoms within it. So you get 10 to the power of 28 atoms in a human body, each of which has a photon of light attached. So if you could release the light in a single human body, we still don't know how to do it, but if you could release the light in a single human body, you could light up a baseball stadium at 1 million watts for 3.5 hours. That's how much light is contained in a human body. Imagine if some being, were advanced enough to release this energy in one extraordinary, spectacular light burst. What effect that might have, on the burial shroud. I think personally that that's what we're looking at. Now it's interesting that Tibetan Buddhism has a similar kind of a notion. They call it the rainbow body. And there's teaching in Tibetan Buddhism that when a very high lama, a very spiritual, enlightened being comes to die, that this person will sit in zazen and meditate and then drop the body. And all you find is, you'll find the clothes. Occasionally they say you'll find hair and teeth, but everything else is gone. And for anybody who's witnessed it, it seems to dissolve into a rainbow body, literally the colors of the rainbow. That's the burst in which it happens. So other traditions have the same notion, that the moment of real resurrection is this kind of letting go of the physical spacesuit and irradiating anything in the environment with the light which is being released. So when I think then about the resurrection of Jesus, I don't so much think that, Jesus temporarily, collected the molecular kind of makeup of the body he had 3 days before, and fashioned it into some kind of a physical spacesuit. Although I have no doubt whatsoever that for somebody who really understands how the universe works, and how the universe really, really works, there is no problem about demanifesting a physical space body, remanifesting it elsewhere, passing through walls, walking in water. The truth is that your physical body right now is 99.99% empty space. It's empty space. This piece of timber here is 99.99% empty space. So why would it be unthinkable that something which is 99.9% empty space couldn't move through something which is also 99.99% empty space? Why does that seem so difficult to imagine if the intelligence behind it, were sufficient? It seems to me that is when we're talking about the Jesus figure or the avatar figure, this is what resurrection means to me. It means that Christ's light body manifested to those who were able to shift their states of consciousness, creating the kinds of transformative experiences that would change these people forever and that would give birth to an extraordinary movement. No matter how corrupt the institutional aspects of this have become, gave birth to a movement which changed planet Earth like nobody ever before or ever since. Okay. Let's go for it, guys. Okay. Jenny. So let's grab a mic.
Okay.
You on? Yeah.
Could you speak, I don't remember when in the process this happened, but Jesus basically said, "Don't touch me.
Yes.
I have not gone to my Father."
Yes.
So
Okay.
putting that overlay on the context of what you just said,
Okay.
that speaks to me or says to me maybe there was a transformation that wasn't complete at
Yes.
that point.
Yes.
Do you have some thoughts around that?
That's actually in John's Gospel. It's John chapter 20. And it's the story that when the Magdalene finally recognizes him, and she didn't initially. So there's something about his post-resurrection appearances where even those who are close to him initially are a little bit puzzled. They don't quite recognize him. So there's a story in Luke's Gospel of 2 other disciples walking on the road to Emmaus, and he joins them. And they're having an animated conversation. He says, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem that doesn't realize what's happened in the last few days?" And he says, "What happened? You didn't hear about Jesus of Nazareth, and we thought he was going to be the Messiah, and he got crucified? I know to kind of, there's some mishigas going on today. Some women think that he's risen from the dead." And Christ walks with them, and he starts explaining the scriptures. And they still have no idea who he is. And they come to Emmaus, and the guys are going to stay the night in Emmaus. He pretends he's going to go on, and they say, no, break bread with us. And he comes in, he sits down in a little hotel, and the food arrives, and he takes the bread, and he breaks the bread. And all of a sudden, their eyes are opened, and they realize it's he. Now, Mary has the same problem. It's early in the morning. Mary's at the tomb. She's been crying. The sun is coming up. She turns around. There's this figure standing behind her saying, "Woman, why are you weeping?" Her eyes, there's refracted tears. She can't recognize him. She thinks it's the gardener. She thinks the gardener has moved the body someplace, and she's going to take it back and bring it home. Only when he calls her name. And he didn't actually just call her Mary or Miriamo. I've said this to you many times. He spoke her soul name. He knew what her soul name was. The name that her soul sang as it winged its way into incarnation. That is the name he pronounced, and that's how she was recognized. And then she saw him. And then, we're told, she flung herself at him, and she clung on to him. And then he says this strange statement that you've just mentioned. "Mary, do not cling to me, because I have not yet ascended to my Father." There are 3 reasons why a recently departed soul wants to stay in Earth orbit. 3 reasons. The first reason is because the person is addicted, either to alcohol or drugs or someplace, and they need a physical body in order to try to indulge the addiction. So they're earthbound because they're desperately trying to indulge this addiction that they can't let go of. That's the first reason. The second reason is that the people who are left behind are so distraught that they can't release the spirit for his journey. And they keep, don't go, I can't believe, don't do this to me, don't do this to me. And so the soul is trapped in Earth orbit because, those who are behind won't let it go. And the third reason is that the soul who is departing is really concerned for those left behind. Let's say it's a young mother who dies in childbirth, and she's just left a little newborn behind her, and she's distraught. The soul is distraught. Can I abandon my little baby? And so the mother is hanging around because the baby needs her. So they're the three reasons. Now, so it's the second reason in this case. Mary so desperately needed the physical expression of Jesus, that the temptation for him was not to keep going on his journey. And his journey was to go all the way back to, he's still at the astral level, to go back up to the mental, the causal, Atman, and Brahman, to reunite with the Father, or Brahmanic consciousness. So he's saying to Mary, don't tempt me, in the sense that it's really tempting to me to want to stay here, and interact with you guys on a long-term basis. Now, allegedly he did it for 40 days, but 40 days is a biblical number meaning completion. The 40 days could in fact have been a single hour. So 40 days is just a biblical number of completion. He completed what he needed to do post-resurrection, which also involved going down to hell, it says in the Creed, to try to release those captured, those souls who were stuck in their own darkness, releasing those. So his job is only complete when he's impressed upon all the players that the only truth is God, the only truth is light. So the temptation for him was to stay with the disciples, or to stay with his mother, or stay with Mary, because of their need for him. And he's not going to do that. He's going to complete his task and then go back to the Father. Yeah. Karen.
So when my mom died, there was a release of light in the room. And my notion of that until right now has always been that space for her to move into had moved into the room. Okay. And now I'm thinking it's the release of her light is what I was seeing, not the other way around.
Beautiful, beautiful. It is. Every person who drops the spacesuit releases light, whether it's on the visible spectrum to all those present or not, is a matter of maybe luck or the person going. But we're all releasing light. If we're letting go completely, we're releasing light. And so that's why in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, part of the transitionary rites is to watch for the light. Because not only are you releasing light, you're the shaft of light that's being released to go back to the source, which is the sun. And so you've got to follow that shaft back to source. So, and rather than be tempted and kind of distracted by other possibilities, you have to follow that light beam back to source. Yeah.
Could I ask one more?
Sure.
It's on a different subject. When we were doing the exploration group and we were talking a lot about lucid dreaming and people were having those experiences, could you say a little bit about kind of the protection that a person might want to? So
Karen is asking about lucid dreaming and the protection necessary to do it. Whenever you climb aboard the astral body and you start traveling, whether it's dreams at night, whether you've learned how to do out-of-body travel, whether you're having a near-death experience, anytime you travel out of body, you're going through other realms and other dimensions of reality. And they're not all friendly spaces. Hinduism divides the astral planes into two levels, the higher and the lower. The higher astral planes are where angelic beings and avatars, that energy exists. The lower astral planes consist of fellow travelers like yourself who are out of body through either a dream state or cultivated out-of-body experiences, are discombobulated entities who've died and have refused to disidentify. They can't identify with the physical body anymore, it's gone. They're not identified with the etheric body, that's dissolved, but they are identified with the astral body, and they're hanging on tenaciously, for one of the three reasons I mentioned. Addiction, because we won't let them go, or because they feel their job isn't complete. For whatever reason, they're in a kind of low Earth orbit. And so as you travel at night, it is very, very important. Whether or not you're lucidly dreaming, you're traveling your astral body. With lucid dreaming, you're just aware of the fact that you're dreaming. But in either case, it is very, very important, to go with protection. So as a small child growing up in Ireland, every one of us was taught the last prayer at night was to say, Angel of God, my guardian dear, to whom God's love commits me here, ever this night be at my side, to rule and guard, to light and guard. Amen. So you traveled in an angelic, membrane of protection. Personally for myself, the last prayer I say every night before I go to sleep, and when I hit the bed, I go out like that. But the last thing I say to myself is, I now dissolve my ego, And I travel in the astral and higher planes, visiting with light beings and assisting sentient beings who are in distress according to my ability level. I don't want to get into stuff I can't handle. And so I'm happy to assist anybody, any soul I meet, as long as I have the ability to do it. I don't want to get into the deep doo-doo that I can't handle. And so I want to travel with protection myself. So it's really, really important, that for any important enterprise, and that you're surrounding yourself with light or surrounding yourself with angelic beings, particularly if you're shifting your state of consciousness. Deep meditation, lucid dreaming, out-of-body experiences, whatever. Very important that you travel surrounded by light. Yeah. You get it. Back to Rachel.
Thank you. Do you have to say particular words to do that, or is there, and if so, would you repeat them?
Okay.
Or can
Sure.
you do it another way?
Formulas are only important so far as they encapsulate intention. And intention, is an artifact of awareness. And so you can say words that are meaningless. You can even form an intention which is, semi-conscious. The power of intention is the amount of awareness you bring to the exercise. And so it is the amount of consciousness that you bring to the articulation of the intention that really matters. The formulation doesn't particularly matter, but it's the intentionality, not just tossing off this kind of random statement. But the one I use personally is, I now dissolve my ego. I travel in the astral and higher planes, visiting with light beings and helping sentient beings who are in distress according to my ability level. Yeah. Okay. Have you still got the mic? Okay.
So I'm always very skeptical of everything.
Good.
And
Good
so
for you.
I don't,
Good.
totally believe in this.
Okay.
But I want to protect myself.
Good.
So can I just say something very simple, like
Sure.
like I may be
Yeah, absolutely.
traveling in this realm,
Yeah,
and maybe
To whom it
I'll-
may concern.
yeah, and maybe I'll help you. But
Yeah.
anyway, anybody who's out there that's good, please help me.
If I need you, be there. If you're not there, it doesn't matter. Okay. I tell you a funny story. There's a story in Ireland about an old man going across a very, very shaky little wooden bridge over a huge chasm, and he's praying for protection. He doesn't want to kind of upset anybody, so he goes across the bridge, and he's step by step, and he says, God is good. God is good. And sure, the devil himself isn't bad. Just in case he's listening.
But I'm serious.
Cover your bases, absolutely. Yeah. Good, good. Got a question up here, Michael? What's your name? I don't know. Rob, good.
So I have a follow-up question to you. You said that the 40 days means completion, could be 1 hour. So my question is, if it can be 1 hour, could it be 1 second? Or could it actually, is it really necessary to the whole message? It's never seemed to me to be necessary.
The time
Well,
piece.
that it even exists.
Okay. Which part exists, Rob?
Well, in other words, to me, the whole story
Okay.
is like an allegory.
Okay.
Okay. And the truth is in the message of hope. It isn't in a physical plane. So I don't understand why people spend any energy at all trying to understand or verify the physical aspect of it, because it's not, it isn't important. So, well, I guess that's really my question.
Great,
In your
sure.
opinion, is it
Good.
important?
It's important in this level, Rob, because we live in physical bodies and we interact in physical bodies. And Jesus, as far as I was concerned, was a real physical human being, who had a real physical ending, and left a family in distress behind them. And so whatever their experience was, they articulated in such a way that they had to impress upon them the reality of it. So they employed two kinds of metaphors when they spoke about it. And in biblical theology, they're called the before-after images and the below-above images. So the before-after images, they're trying to impress upon their audience that it really was the same person they encountered after the resurrection as they'd known before. And so there'll be stories like, for instance, in John's Gospel, and the first time he appeared to them as a group, Thomas isn't present. And when they tell Thomas, Thomas won't believe it. He said, unless I literally put my finger into the marks of the nails and my hand in his side, I'm not going to believe. So the next week, he's with them, according to the stories, and Christ says to him, Thomas, do you want to test it out, see if it's for real? And so Thomas seems to have an encounter that feels real flesh and blood to him. He puts his finger into the nail marks and his hand in the side. They also impressed us, said, he ate with us. He literally ate fish and bread with us. And so they really tried to impress. It wasn't a mirage. It wasn't made up. It was really, really he. So they're called the before-after images. But there's another issue, and that is something is very different about him. So then they employ the below-above images. He is transformed in some way. So now, for instance, he appears in a room with the doors locked, and he's just there. So he didn't knock at the door and say, can I come in? He's just there. So somehow something is different. The body has been transformed while it is still he. So they're implying there's something is different. The below version, the fully physicalized version, is different from the version we encountered in some way. Now it's interesting when you look at those two images, before, after, and below, above, you get another form of the cross. And the cross for me is about transcending space and time. The horizontal arm of the cross is transcending space, and the vertical arm of the cross is transcending time. And when you understand either crucifixion or resurrection, you've stepped outside of time. And so in a sense, whether it was a minute's experience, a flash experience, a 40-day experience, you've literally, when you step into another dimension, time doesn't exist. Time is an artifact of this dimension here. And so we come back then, and we try to express the experience, and we're forced to use linear language that involves chronology in it. But it's a totally leaky vessel. You can't contain a non-temporal experience in chronological timeline. But it's a real experience, nevertheless. You get the very same thing happens with near-death experiences. That people who talk about near-death experiences, who have had near-death experiences, that when they speak of the life review, that their entire life comes before them, and not only just event by event by event, but they get to experience each event from the viewpoints and the perspectives of all of the participants in each of the events. And they do that in a flash of time, because there is no time. Time the reason that we've invented time is that as souls, when you incarnate, you have to limit yourself. You who have a cosmic spaciousness are now confined to a little 150-pound frame, or in the case of a little embryo, a 3 or 4 pound embryo. You who were timeless now have to break up the experiences that your little laptop is trying to compute, and the experience is so vast that you have to break it up into bite-sized pieces and then process them sequentially, so you have to invent time in order to do that. But if your brain were bigger, you could literally download it. If you go onto the internet, I have a little Kindle, and I want to buy a book from Amazon, and I hit, buy, and literally 5 or 6 seconds, and the book is downloaded. So everything that's going to take me next, 10 days to read through is downloaded in an instant. Now that's maybe a slow modem. It can be instantaneous. And so the truth is that when you step outside of time, there is no time. Eternity is not a long period of time. Eternity is timelessness. It is no time whatsoever. And then all the rules change, and all the laws are different. Good. So somebody who hasn't spoken yet. Ingrid. Thanks, Rob. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
One of my favorite definitions of a miracle is from the Course of Miracles, okay. And they say it's a shift of perception. Yes. And I really was curious about these things that materialize and dematerialize, yes. Or you see it or you don't see it, or believe it or not. Mm-hmm. And I went to a Dowser's meeting last week. Okay. A physicist spoke, and she's also a Dowser who works with these subtle energies. And she talked about quantum jumps and reality shifts. And once you are open to the realization that everything is just a particle field responding to our thought forms, consensual realities, expectations, past experiences. But when you're open and you're curious and you have a sense of wonder and excitement and just what could be possible, one of her main mantras is, how good can it get? She's had amazing experiences, and she talked about spontaneous healings. She talked about divine interventions, but also the curious phenomena where things will disappear and reappear, like when a little key gnome takes your keys or something like that, and all of a sudden you looked there and you didn't find it, and then all of a sudden you find it. It's there.
Absolutely.
So I'm so fascinated by that phenomena.
That's brilliant, brilliant good. I shared with you a few weeks ago a vision I had some months back of looking at love, the love of the Trinity, and seeing that love gives birth to twins, and the twins to which it gives birth are light and logos. And light at various levels of densification is matter, and logos at various levels of densification is mind. And then mind and matter, or light and logos, dance with each other. And that's really, as far as I'm concerned, that's the double helix. That's the real double helix. The swirling dance between light and logos, between mind and matter, is what creates all life forms. So it's just a question of what level of subtlety of light is meeting what level of subtlety of logos. And then the being, the form, or the life form that comes out of that is going to be really, really subtle. If it's a very dense form of light encountering a very dense form of logos, then you get denser beings. Humans are somewhere halfway down the scale. We're a little bit subtle, a little bit dense in both light and in mind. There are beings which are much denser, like rocks. There are beings which are much lighter, much more subtle, like angelic beings. So it just means what level of light is dancing with what level of logos in order to see, what level of reality we're encountering. Now, we are multidimensional beings as human beings. We carry all these dimensions within us. The question is, how do you access them? Because when you do access them, all of the things you're mentioning, Ingrid, are possible, and occur. If you're operating at a much, much subtler level of the self, where your light body is interacting with your light mind at much different levels, you're in the business of actually creating reality, not just encountering your reality, you're actually creating it. Yeah. Sharon, sorry. So, okay.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
Hold it right up to your mouth.
I had a few years back been obsessed about finding the real story, the right one, about Jesus, about Mary, Magdalene, et cetera, and I finally gave it up when someone once said, Sharon, don't get too caught up with the stories, because it's the message that comes to you that's, she said it in a better way, that what really matters and what Jesus came to share with us. But yet there's so many different versions of even the Shroud of Turin. I thought it was the person who gave him a cloth to wipe his face during the thing. Then others say it's the whole cloth. Well, does that really matter in my life right now? But not too much, but it's interesting. But what mattered more was what his life was like as a child, as a teenager, as a young man, etc. In all those blanks areas that the Bible doesn't talk about, and it seems to make sense to me that with timelessness and with the idea of parallel lives happening simultaneously, other versions of myself and Jesus and everybody else can be experiencing something different. So I'm wondering whether all these different channelings supposedly may be more than just their own ego presenting what they'd like to think about Jesus's life, and possibly actual channelings of a parallel life of Jesus in another place and time.
Okay, so let's cut it off there, Sharon. Let me respond to that. You're absolutely right. There are stories, but the truth is, we're storytellers. Everything in our life is storytelling. You come home in the evening, and somebody asks you, "How was your day?" You're going to talk about the stories, the events, the interactions of the. That's how we create our maps of reality. As long as we know they're maps. The map is not the terrain. The map is not the message. But the maps are really important. If you're in strange territory, you don't know where you're going, a map is really important. Now, there are different levels of map. If the map is too detailed, it's huge, it's useless to you. If it's not detailed enough, you're going to get lost. So we have to constantly dance between the map and the terrain. But we're always going to need maps. And there's a reason God gave us an intellect. We're not just emotional beings. We're not just people who are given a message and asked to believe it. We're given intelligence to try to figure out for ourselves how do the data fit together and what kinds of patterns do they create. Which is not to say that these map onto real truth. We have no idea what real truth is. There's a fallacy in philosophy called the myth of the given, which is the belief system that our sensorium delivers to us an accurate one-to-one representation of what's out there. We have no idea what's out there. All we can say is that given the 5 senses we have and the very narrow range of each of these senses and the little laptop we carry between our ears, here's the map that I'm able to make of what's out there. I have no idea if it corresponds with what's out there or not. And all I can try to do is, in the course of my life, create less inaccurate maps. I'm never going to create a map that's the terrain. It can't happen. But we need maps. Great. Sure, living. 11. Okay, this will be the final one. Okay.
Would you please say more about the Eucharist, the levels of energy, and how that transformed the disciples?
Okay. Sure, thanks, Pat. My belief system is that this is from my reading of Scripture and my own experience as a Catholic priest for 40 years, celebrating Eucharist on a regular basis, that for me personally, Eucharist is the single most transformative thing I do, as a kid attending Mass, as a priest celebrating Mass, because my understanding of Eucharist is that literally it takes me outside of time. It is not the memorial of an event that happened 2,000 years ago. It is a participation in a mystery at a much higher level than the mere physicality of it. So the New Testament is written in Greek, including Paul. Paul, in his first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 11, he talks about Eucharist, and in his first letter to the Corinthians in chapter 15, he talks about resurrection. And he's using the same kind of language in both of them. And Jesus in John's Gospel in chapter 6, after he has told the people, unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you do not have life in you, and they're disgusted, they think he's advocating some form of cannibalism, and we're told they didn't walk anymore with him, and he lost the entire crowd. And finally, when it was too late, he realized he'd pushed it too far, too fast. And for those who were willing to listen, he said, the words I spoke to you are spirit and life. The flesh availeth nothing. Sarx avails nothing. Paul is saying sarx cannot inhabit the kingdom of God. So resurrection is not about sarx. And Jesus is saying flesh and blood. I'm not talking about flesh and blood. It's not my physical body I'm talking about. I'm talking about spirit. And so the proper understanding of Eucharist is that a Eucharistic encounter is not that you come up and the priest puts a little bit of what used to be bread on your mouth, but after the words of consecration, it gets transmogrified, and it's now literally the physical body of a carpenter who died 2,000 years ago. It is not that at all. It is that there is an encounter happening at an astral or higher level between the essence of the Jesus and the essence of whoever is receiving. So it's a real encounter, which is outside of time. And so the real understanding of Eucharist is not that consecration changes the elements into the body and blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It is the attitude of the recipient that creates the encounter. So if I got a little kid coming up to communion with a piece of chewing gum in one side of his mouth and he sticks out his tongue, and I put a host on the other, and there's Jesus wrestling with Wrigley's inside in his mouth, that is not a Eucharistic encounter. That's a kid with a piece of bread and a piece of chewing gum. If somebody comes up and they know what's happening, and they put their hand out, as some people do here, and hold it, and see through it, and then bow and say, Namaste. The divine in me recognizes and honors the divine in you, then you've got a real Eucharistic encounter. It has nothing got to do with a piece of bread. It's everything got to do with the connection between the essence of the Christ and the essence of the recipient. I thank you guys for your patience. So before we continue with our Eucharist, let's offer each other a sign of our peace.